Welcome. My name is Aaron Such. I am the Program Director for Solar United Neighbors of Virginia. I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Jessica Hamilton, and our partner, Helen Reinecke-Wilt from Arlington County. I'd like to welcome you to the Solar EV Info session. And we were really able to have such a great partner in Arlington County, also Eco Action Arlington. So before we get started, just a quick review of what we're doing differently in light of the public health crisis with COVID. First and foremost, health and safety is the #1 priority with Solar United Neighbors, with our partners, with participants, as well as our installers. So we are working with partners, monitoring the changing conditions, and are prepared to adjust course. But it's important to remember that solar is vital, especially as we recover to a sense of normalcy. Its benefits in resiliency, job creation, clean air, and reduced energy burden are really key to our recovery. Moving forward, all of our information sessions will be as online webinars in this format that you're seeing here. Our selection committees, in which co-op participants meet to review the proposals, will now be online. We're also working closely with installers to confirm and share their safety protocols for interacting with customers. And that might be virtual site visits and reviewing protocol for in-person installations. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. We're going to aim for about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. We're going to go and divide this into 3 sections. So I'm going to give you an overview of the technology of solar, have some question and answer after each section, go into electric vehicles, and then how the co-op works and the economics. But if you are not familiar with Solar United Neighbors, we're a nonprofit organization that started essentially by accident. Pictured in the right-hand corner is my boss, Anya Schoolman, who tried to go solar in 2007 after seeing the movie Inconvenient Truth. And when she did so, it was so challenging at the time and more than 3 times the cost of what it is now, she decided to take her whole neighborhood solar. And that's essentially what she did. She got about 100 of her closest neighbors in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood of Washington, D.C., and formed a co-op. You could think of it as a loose-knit buying group that helps leverage the group for resources as well as economics of scale. And after 2 years, she took 45 people solar as part of this Mount Pleasant Solar Co-op. So Solar United Neighbors, which we were known as Community Power Network at the time, started as a desire from other people to replicate this success story. She literally started with working in her living room with a couple volunteers. In fact, when I joined in 2014, our office in Washington, D.C. was Anya's house. But now we are a 12-state nonprofit that has worked in Virginia since 2014. And we represent a constituency of solar owners. These are solar owners or prospective solar owners. And we divide our work into 3 different categories. Our Go Solar program, so we're going to be speaking about the solar co-op. We also have a membership program. And then joining together. So these things could be solar tours or helping coalesce the movement and connect other solar owners together. And lastly, it's fighting for energy rights. And we've had quite a run since we started. We are getting close to about 5,000 installations. We've installed about 30 megawatts worth of installed capacity in the 12 states that we've worked. In Virginia, we are getting close to about 900 installations, about 6.5 megawatts of installed capacity. And probably what we're most proud of is our 10,000 solar supporters that fight for energy rights. And in this last legislative session, we were able to leverage them and pass some really exciting legislation. So ways that you can engage with us as an organization. Well, we're going to be speaking about the solar co-op, which is on the left-hand side. So I'm going to go more into that process in the forthcoming slides. But you could be a member or a supporter. So if the co-op isn't a good fit, you could get support as a member with a new or existing system. You can also join together with us. So maybe going solar isn't a good fit for you right now, but you want to attend a solar tour or a happy hour. There are those opportunities. And then, of course, fighting for energy rights. So we are really exciting, we had a really exciting legislative session in which we helped pass a number of bills to expand net metering and fair solar access for everybody. We took the lead on passing an HOA bill that gives folks in HOA associations more rights to go solar. So we want to count on you to join us if that's something of interest. But I'm going to go and start with the basics of how solar works. So we all come from different backgrounds and experiences with solar. I'm going to just start from the basics. When you are thinking of solar energy, you're usually thinking of two different types of technologies. There is solar thermal down at the bottom, and that's using the sun's heat to heat water for bathing or for a pool. That's a great technology, but we're really going to focus on the other technology, and that's solar photovoltaic, or PV for short, and that's converting the sun's solar energy to electricity. And you could think of a solar PV system as a generator with no moving parts, a free source of fuel, and a 25-year plus lifespan with very little maintenance. And those components are divided into a couple different types of components of your system. First, and probably the most obvious, is your solar panels. So the solar panels are about 3.5 by 5.5 feet long, and they're measured in wattage. Kind of like the old incandescent light bulbs. If you had a 50-watt light bulb, it would draw 50 watts of power. Well, solar panels are measured in the wattage that they're capable of producing at any given instant. So you might have a 300-watt panel, and that's capable of producing 300 watts. Very rarely would you have a system on a home or business with just one solar panel. It would be grouped into numerous solar panels would be grouped into an array measured in 1,000-watt increments. So if you had 4 250-watt panels, that would be a 1,000-watt system or a kilowatt. Moving on to other system components, of course, you have your panels, and depending on what type of roof you have, you're going to have a racking system which affixes those panels to the roof. So you see an asphalt shingle roof, probably the most common is pictured there, but you may have a standing seam metal roof or a TPO rubber membrane roof. You're going to have a racking system that's going to be able to be accommodated to that. And let's just say your roof isn't a good fit for solar, but you have some space on the ground. You can have a ground mounted system as well, and we'll see a picture of that in a later slide. The one exception to roofs is if you have a slate roof. Slate roofs are really difficult to install solar on. Many installers will not install on a slate roof, or the ones that do will charge you substantially more, but that's just something to keep in mind. So you have your panels, your racking system.
Aaron, you cut out for just a second. I said you cut out for just 1 second. Do you mind?
Thank you. So I'll repeat. You have a racking system, again, that's going to affix to your roof. Almost all different types of roofs are able to support solar panels. The one exception would be slate roofs. So your racking system, and then you have your inverter. Your inverter is a power conditioning device. It takes the panels, or the electricity from the panels, which is direct current electricity, and converts it into alternating current. Alternating, or AC power, is what your home or business uses. So that inverter conditions it and allows it to be used on site. And there's a couple different types of inverter technologies. You might have a microinverter system or a system with DC optimizers, but the technology really is the same. It helps convert that DC power to AC power or alternating current. So to put that all together, you have your technology. We're going to talk about kilowatts and kilowatt hours. So to give an example, if you had 12 250-watt panels, which are pictured here, 12 times 250 is 3,000 watts, or it would be a 3-kilowatt system. Again, system size is always measured in kilowatts, kind of like horsepower for your generator. The more kilowatts, the more robust and more energy you'll be able to produce. Your electricity production from solar is measured in kilowatt hours. So even though they're similar, it's completely different. Your kilowatt hours, or your energy production, is going to depend on the size of your system in kilowatts and the orientation and the type of shading that your site has. The good news is you don't have to figure that out. Your installer is going to tell you exactly what a system on your home is going to produce annually in kilowatt hours. Most homeowners install anywhere between about a 3 kilowatt or a 12 kilowatt system. And probably the most common question we get from people is they say, hey, I have a 2,000 square foot home. How much solar am I going to need and how much is it going to cost? Well, it's really challenging to answer those questions because I don't know what your energy consumption is. Your system size is going to be based on your energy consumption. And the first thing that an installer is going to do is ask for a copy of your utility bill. That has your annual energy usage history, and it's going to help them size a system for your needs. The second factor is your goals for solar. So your goals may be different from one person or the other. The best thing to do is really have what your goals for solar are in mind. Maybe you want battery storage. Maybe you want to power your electric vehicle, or maybe you want to keep your system within a certain budget. That's really important to tell your installer so that you're able to get the system that works best for you. And a lot of people are surprised to know that you don't have to go all or nothing with solar. You don't have to produce 100% of your annual energy use. And that's because a majority of the systems right now are grid tied. They're tied into the electric grid. And a majority, at least at this point, do not use battery storage. So walking you through the schematic, number one, your solar panel converts sunlight to direct current electricity. Number two, your inverter converts that electricity from DC to AC. It conditions the power. And then that energy is instantaneously consumed by your home. So if you have panels on your roof and you've got your lights or your computer on, that energy is going to instantaneously power those devices. Well, let's just say you have panels on your roof and you're on vacation for 2 weeks during the summer, no battery storage on site. What happens to that extra electricity? Well, it's going to flow backwards out onto the grid, and you're going to get a full credit for that, kind of like rollover minutes when they used to do that for cell phones. So with solar, at any given instant, you might have surpluses during certain times of the day or during certain times of the season. And then those surpluses are applied to when your system is not producing during periods of low production or in the evening. And this is what's called net metering. A couple take-home messages here for solar. It's always on an annual billing cycle. And as I mentioned, you're going to have daily or even seasonal surpluses, which are going to be applied to whatever you purchase from the utility. Most solar owners do a percentage of their annual offset. And we like to say that, any amount of solar is good. If you have a small roof or a limited budget, many people will get into a system that maybe produces 20 or 30% of their annual energy usage, whereas some folks will actually size to 100% or even oversize to accommodate future electricity use, like an electric vehicle. And you do get that one-to-one credit. Now, the disadvantage of a purely grid-tied system, and what many people are surprised to know, is that if you have no batteries on site and the grid goes down, your solar will not work. And that's a safety issue, because if you're backfeeding and the utility has folks out there working on the line, that can cause some trouble. So your inverter is automatically going to cut out. And that's where an opportunity is for battery storage. And especially right now during these times, we're seeing a lot of interest in that. So some benefits and drawbacks for batteries. Well, why might you want to have batteries? If you have frequent utility outages, you might live on the end of a distribution feeder and you just don't have a lot of reliable power. Or you have critical energy needs, like a well pump if you're in a rural area, or medical equipment that you can't afford to live without, or even communications equipment that you need. And kind of taking a larger view, emergency disaster preparedness. What we're seeing time and time again is that solar coupled with on-site battery storage is the best way to keep the lights on. We've seen that in hurricanes Irma and Maria in Florida and Puerto Rico, with the California wildfires, and with other disasters. Solar is really resilient energy, so it is one of the best way to keep the lights on. You might also have access to advanced utility rates. So time of use rates are rates that vary. So most of us pay a consistent rate for our energy, whether it's at night or during peak times. But time of use is actually a newer rate that some utilities, in fact, Dominion is looking to roll out a voluntary pilot project in early next year, but in which those rates vary based on peak demand. So with batteries, you might be able to charge your batteries when energy is cheap and abundant from solar, and then discharge it when it's a little bit more expensive. Now, the disadvantages of on-site battery storage with solar are its higher cost. It's going to be a more complex system with more components, and it's going to require more maintenance. So there's a lot of cost-benefit analysis. And our goal as Solar United Neighbors is we know that going solar is a big ticket item, and that you should have all the tools and education at your fingertips to make that decision. So we have a battery storage guide, which is really excellent. Hopefully, Jessica, if you can maybe share that in the chat function or maybe towards the end. It's a really thorough guide that walks you through all of the different questions you should be answering or asking your installer if you're interested in battery storage. This co-op will actually include options for battery storage as well. Now I have one last slide, and then I'm going to go ahead and stop for some questions. I assume we're probably going to have some questions here. But the last thing is what makes a good site for solar? So the first step of the co-op is determining if it's a good fit. And we're going to talk about all of the economics and how the systems work and how the co-op works. But the first thing is determining if your site is a good fit for solar. Some of the things that we're looking at when you join the group, we're going to actually screen your roof. First and foremost, the direction that your roof faces. Does your roof face south? If your roof faces south, you have won the solar lottery, because that is the best direction. We're in the northern hemisphere, so as you face south, you're facing into the equator. But you can actually go solar on an east or west facing roof, and chances are your roof is going to be somewhere in the middle. What you don't want is your best surface for solar to be north. A north facing roof faces away from the equator, and it's typically not going to be worth the investment for the production that you're going to get. But again, it's easy to go solar on an east or west facing roof, and your installer is going to be able to tell you exactly what the production is going to be on that roof surface. The other factor, which is a little bit more challenging, is shading. So the sun is at different angles during certain times of the day or during certain times of the season. So we're calculating to see if a majority of your roof is going to be shaded by the sun from trees or from dormers or gables. A real quick rule of thumb is that you want to have a window of about 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m. to be unshaded. So this is more of an art rather than a science, because some folks are still willing to move forward with a shaded roof where their production isn't going to be as much. But we're trying to make sure that you're going to have enough open access to the sun to make investing in a solar system worth your while. Also, is there enough space to mount panels? So another quick rule of thumb is for a minimum size system, you're probably looking for at least 200 square feet of unobstructed roof space that's going to face, well, it's not going to face in a northerly direction. So these big, beautiful gables and dormers that we see on some of the Cape Cods are not really good for solar, because the panels can't bend around them. So you're going to want that roof space to be unobstructed and flat enough to put the panels on. And lastly, I mentioned the panels themselves are warranted for 25 years. So this is a long life system. So if you have to replace your roof within the next 10 years, it's best to go solar either after you replace your roof or at the same time. What you want to avoid is putting the panels on your roof and then having to pay somebody to take them off and reinstall them when you do your roof. So I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you. We have a couple questions here. Lori asks, what are the options if one has a slate roof?
If one has a slate roof?
Yes.
Yeah, it depends. Some installers will install on slate roof. So your first option is to find an installer that feels comfortable installing on slate. And then the second is just be prepared to spend a little bit more on that installation. It's going to be a more delicate installation. It's going to require more time and labor. So yeah, you're going to want to find an installer that installs on slate, and then know that it's going to be a little bit more of a premium price for that job. That's a great question.
So Charles has a question. He wants to know if anybody is installing solar shingles or the bifacial panels now that the prices have dropped.
Yeah, good question. So I'll start with bifacial panels. So bifacial panels are panels that can get the sun's radiation from both sides, the front and the back. And we are starting to see some of those. I've seen some installations, especially on flat roofs, use the bifacial panels. Solar shingles are a little more rare. They're pretty rare in the sense that, first and foremost, they're not widely available. So Tesla does a great job of putting out some excellent marketing materials. What Tesla hasn't done a good job of is actually delivering them. So there's some challenges. First and foremost, they're not widely available in Virginia. The other issue with solar shingles is, if you have 10 or 12 panels up on your roof, you have 10 to 12 potential points of failure. Chances are they're not going to fail, but it's pretty easy to troubleshoot those 10 to 12 panels. Well, with multiple panels or with multiple shingles, potentially hundreds, if not thousands of shingles, it makes it harder to troubleshoot. The other issue with solar shingles is that most solar installers are not roofers. So if you have an issue with your roof, you have to replace your solar shingle. It's an integral part of the structure. And most installers aren't really equipped or designed their business to do roofing. I think it's a great technology. I want to see it more. The ones that are installed in out of state and other states are, compared to just putting panels on an existing roof, are substantially more expensive. I think it's a great technology, but I'd like to see more of a track record of installations here in Virginia.
Great, thank you. We'll take one more question about the solar technology, and then we have a bunch of questions about SRACs and some more of the economics, so we'll save those for later in the presentation. But Sue, she asks about what about critters? So for squirrels and raccoons around the area, how do you mitigate those?
Yeah, what about critter guards? So yeah, one of the most common complaints that we have or reasons for panels not working is squirrels gnawing through wiring. So what I would say is, if you live in an area where there is a lot of squirrels, you see a lot of them, it is a good investment to potentially look into critter guards. And critter guards or squirrel guards will hide some of the wiring so it's not accessible to that. I live in Richmond, and my neighbor feeds the squirrels. So when I go solar, I'm probably going to put squirrel guards on there because I hear them on my roof quite a bit. It's a really good question. You can also get snow guards too, where if there's a sheet of ice or snow that comes down, and that can protect it from falling down or falling onto people if they're underneath the panels. Good question.
All right, thank you.
Great. All right, well, we're going to move on to the next section, and I know there's going to be a lot of questions about economics and all the incentives, so we'll get to that at the very end. We're going to talk a little bit about electric vehicles and charging infrastructure as part of this co-op. So I like to think of solar as a local fuel. And if you think of electricity, it's actually a very amazing source of fuel because of all the things that you can do with it. Think of all the things that you can do with electricity. You can heat, cook, cool, run water, purify water, run an electric vehicle, keep beer cold. But seriously, these are things that are really vital. And so what you have is folks that install solar and realizing that they can now fuel their vehicle with panels on their rooftop. And this is the third iteration of the group that we've done with EV chargers. So I'm going to walk you through some of the considerations for electric vehicle chargers and then take some questions and move on to economics. So electric vehicle chargers are classified based on the infrastructure required for them and the rate at which they charge a vehicle. So if you wanted to think of your electric car battery as kind of a barrel of water, you could think of the charging rate as how fast that level charges it. And then if the infrastructure, you think of what it needs in order to function at your house. So a level 1 electric vehicle charger, chances are you could probably look around your living room or wherever you're at and find a level 1 EV charger, because that's a 120 volt outlet. It's very basic infrastructure, and the rate at which it charges your electric vehicle is about 5 to 6 miles per hour of charge. So to use the analogy of your battery being a barrel of water, it'd be like filling up your barrel or bucket of water with your faucet from your bathroom or from your kitchen. It would take a while. It's a slower rate of charge. Whereas level 2 chargers are going to require a little bit more robust infrastructure, and they're going to charge quicker. So level 2 charger requires a 240 volt outlet installed by a professional electrician. And for that, you're going to get about 10 to 30 miles of hour per charge, 10 to 30 miles of charge per hour. Now that's going to depend on the type of vehicle and the type of amperage you have, but it would be like filling up that barrel instead of with that level 1 with a slow faucet. It'd be like using a garden hose, so a little bit quicker, but it does require that infrastructure. Now there's a variety of units and brands. You could, probably the easiest way to take a look at that is to go on Amazon and look at the different types of EV chargers. There's all the way from Juicebox to Clipper Creek to Siemens. There's a pretty wide variety of them. Networked is typically best practice. When I say network, I mean able to be connected and communicate to the internet. And that's because a lot of these advanced time of use rates, advanced rates that the utilities are rolling out often require some type of communication or data collection. So it's not 100% necessary to have that internet connection, but it is best. Also, if you're in a commercial facility, a network charger can tell you exactly, give you some charging data if your charger is being used, or give you some data as to the type of usage it is. Now, the typical warranty is 3 years for that EV charger, the unit itself, and then depending on the electrician's warranty, they're going to have a work warranty for that as well. So that's the level 2 charger. Now, the DC fast charger is what you would see off of the interstate. It's, the Tesla fast chargers, and that's really not cut out for residential systems. So we're going to be talking about the level 2 chargers. Now you see a couple different examples of charging. On the left, you see a public or commercial system or charging system, 2 Chevy Volts plugged right into that. That's a pedestal mount. Whereas a residential system, you might see it mounted inside a garage, or also a pedestal mount, or maybe on the side of your house. Those are a couple of the different areas that you would mount your EV charger. So your installation considerations for your electric vehicle charger, what should you be thinking about? Again, where it's installed. So is it on the inside of your house, interior or exterior? You're going to think if it's going to be a wall mount or a pedestal. So a good example on the bottom is a wall-mounted system in the garage, and a pedestal is a picture on the right. In fact, that was, I think, Michael Bruno from our first EV co-op, the first installation, has a pedestal mounted charger right there outside of his house. And then also your electric service. So your EV charger does require some robust amperage. It's a 240 volt system. So you're looking to see if you have at least 30 to 50 amps in your service panel that are going to be available. Is it also going to be a Tesla or universal charger? So Tesla has its own charging system, whereas Universal or the J1772 fits with all vehicles, and Tesla has an adapter for that. That's going to be a consideration if you're thinking of getting an EV in the future, or if it is a commercial location. Again, network capability is really, really important. And the cord length. Cord length is something you should not take lightly, because there is no worse feeling than having about 2 feet left of cord before you can get to your car. And I've had that happen to me a couple times. Cord length is also what drives the cost. The copper wiring for the cord is really expensive. So a longer cord, which could be starting at 10 all the way to 25 feet, is going to affect the cost of your system. And if you are looking at a commercial system, public accessibility. So you're going to want to have it access to the public, or if it's just going to be a private EV charger. Lastly, does it look cool? But seriously, aesthetics are a very important part. This is something that's going to be in your house or maybe on your business. So you're going to want to make sure that it's aesthetically pleasing. And these are a lot of the things that are going to drive costs. Again, this is a snapshot of some of the costs involved with an EV charger. So the charging unit could be anywhere from $500 to $700, depending on the type. You might actually be able to get some deals for some that are around $200 or $300 if you look hard enough. And then your installation is really going to depend on the type of site you have. How easy is it to access the electric infrastructure? Is there any trenching or any drywall work needed? If you look down at the bottom there, that's a pedestal charger, and it's in the middle of an island in a commercial system or a commercial application. So chances are there's going to be some trenching or wiring involved in that type of installation. Conversely, if you have a real simple wall mount installation, it's probably going to be less cost, especially if it is close to the electric service. So your total cost for an EV charger installed could be anywhere between $1,000 or $2,700 plus. It really depends on the type of installation and what you want to do. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take some questions, if there are any, on the EV charger before we get into how the co-op works and then into the economics. Again, I appreciate you all bearing with me in light of the technical difficulties. Jessica?
I'll leave it open for just one more minute. If anyone has any questions about EV chargers, go ahead and put it in the chat now.
Okay. While we're waiting, the next slide is going to be addressing some of the barriers that the group addresses, how the EV co-op works, and then getting into some of the economics, return on investment.
All right, sounds like you explained EV charging perfectly. There are no questions.
Fair enough. All right, so how does the solar EV co-op work? You could think of the co-op as a voluntary, loose-knit buying group that addresses some of the principal barriers to solar. The goal is that you get support through the process. We like to say that solar is a big-ticket item, so you should be as informed as a consumer as possible. Also gives you the opportunity to join the solar movement. So a lot of folks that install solar as part of our solar co-ops become solar evangelists. If it were, you can volunteer your house to be part of a solar tour. You can do education presentations. Some people are just very fine with doing their solar and saying, that's okay, I've done my thing, that's all right. So there is opportunities for you to get involved or not. It is open to homeowners, businesses, farms, nonprofits. A majority of our installations are homeowners because the decision-making process is typically pretty easy. It usually goes something like this. Let me check with my husband or my wife, and if it's okay with them, we'll move forward. Whereas businesses or governments or farms or nonprofits typically have a little bit longer decision-making process. But it is open to all of those different types of sites. So breaking down the process of the co-op, we typically divided into 3 different phases or 3 different steps. The first phase, which we'll go through on the left-hand side, is really kind of the launch phase and growing the co-op. Your first step is to learn about the co-op and see if it's a good fit. That's why we talk about the technology, how the co-op works, as well as the return on investment. So if it is a good fit, we sign up online to participate in the co-op. And I asked Jessica to share the online sign-up form for you to consider that. And then grow the co-op. So we really rely a lot on organic word of mouth, people to grow the group and to help us reach our next milestone. So once the group grows to about 30 members, again, signing up to participate in the co-op is no obligation. We're gonna, once you sign up, screen your roof, make sure that it's a good fit. And once we get about 30 members that have signed up that have good sites for solar, we're gonna issue our RFP, or request for proposal. And our groups are really stakeholder driven, meaning that we facilitate them, but it's meant to empower the participants to have some decision-making process. So we issue a competitive RFP in which all area and regional installers are welcome to bid. And then we review the bids, call references, check licensing, equipment, warranties, all of that stuff. And then once that's done, we're going to call on participants, which is you all, people that have joined the co-op, to help select the installer. So we put all of that information together from the RFP. And also that RFP criteria is based on a selection criteria that you can choose when you sign up. So maybe you're interested in solar plus storage or American-made panels or pricing. That RFP criteria and the installer is going to know exactly what's important to the group. But once that selection committee comes together, they're going to review all of the bids and select a single installer on behalf of the group. And typically the installer is going to bid with a package, right? So you could think of it as a car analogy. They're going to bid with a workhorse kind of economical panel, almost like a Toyota Corolla. You might also have options for more efficient panels or American-made panels or a little bit fancier materials, but all of that's going to be contained in the bid. Once that installer is selected, they're going to begin to reach out to you, the participant, to schedule a site visit. And they're going to talk to you. The first thing that they're going to ask for is a copy of your utility bill. What they'll probably do is take a look at your home, maybe do a SketchUp of a rudimentary system design, and then visit with you to determine what your goals are for solar. So they're going to ask you, what you're trying to do. Are you trying to power your electric vehicle? Do you want storage? Do you have a budget? These are things that you should really be prepared as a participant. It's kind of like getting a haircut. You don't just sit down in the barber's chair and say, cut my hair. You say, hey, these are my goals. So tailor that proposal based on that. Now, all of it's going to come in at the co-op pricing. And once you receive that proposal, you have 30 days to sign it. The group is about a 7 to 8 month process. So you could think of it as something that does not go on indefinitely. It's kind of like a sale. So having that 30-day deadline helps people make that decision. And it's also fair to the installer because they bid relatively or pretty aggressively. So they don't want to, or we don't want to have them hold that pricing indefinitely based on how the market changes and availability of components. So you have 30 days to sign that contract. At any time, that's when we're going to be there to give you support. So if you have questions about your proposal, or maybe you got another proposal from a co-op or from outside of the co-op, we're happy to give you that support and help you compare apples to apples and make that best decision. It's not obligatory until you sign the contract with the installer. And then as part of the co-op, it's just between you and the installer. So once you sign the co-op or once you sign the proposal, from the time you sign it, typically it's about a 2 to 4 or even 5 month process to get your panels installed. The panel installation is relatively quick. They can typically do it in about a day, but there's a lot of different permitting that needs to take place, final interconnection. So just based on our experience, we like to say anywhere about 2 to 4 months before you sign that contract and your system is installed. And then the final step is my favorite part, is a celebration party. So once all of the co-op's installations are done, we're going to meet maybe at somebody's house or at a bar and have people share their experience about going solar as part of the group. So I think I'm going to go for a couple more slides and then get some questions before we move on to economics. So what do I do? So as someone who's participating, the first steps, just to underline, first and foremost, learn about solar and about EV charging. When you join the group, you're also going to get a lot of emails and a lot of educational materials that's going to help you understand how solar works. The other thing is spreading the word. So help us grow the group. We really want to get, over 100 or 150 folks as part of this group. The bigger the group, really, the more impact that we can make. Stay tuned for updates. So when you're a part of the group, we'll give you an update every 2 or 3 weeks about the progress of the co-op. Maybe it's about the RFP. We'll send an email to y'all to ask who wants to volunteer to be part of the selection committee. Again, no solar experience needed for that. If you're really interested in selecting the installer, you can help do that. And that's our RFP phase, which we're really close to coming up on. And then be ready for your site visit. So once the installer is selected, really be ready to know what your goals are for solar. Understand the way your proposal's priced. And if you have questions, reach out to us. And then your installation phase, and then celebrate and fight for solar rights or not. Again, some people are really interested in getting involved. Other folks are, well, once they go solar, they're, hey, I got my solar, you can leave me alone. So I think that's the, yeah, before we move on to the economics, I'm going to take some questions about the co-op process. So are there any?
Yeah, we have a couple about the process. So Carl says that he's already received some quotes from solar installers, and he wanted to know how he can compare what he has with what the selected installer will have.
Yeah, so you've already had a couple quotes. That's good. So when you join the co-op and you get a quote from an installer, what we typically do is ask you to share those quotes, and we can compare it and basically compare apples to apples. So when we're looking at a quote to compare, you're looking at price per watt, the components, the different types of design. You're also looking at warranties. And just looking at that basic criteria can give you a good example or a good threshold for making a decision. And in many cases, folks really see that the value in the co-op. And in other cases, you may see that it makes more sense to go with another installer. That's fine as well. Our job is just to give you the tools to make that decision. So we'll help you compare all those based on some of those criteria.
Great, thank you. So Manishi has a question. Can I apply for the co-op to design and install a solar installation for a building that is yet to be constructed?
Good question. So you're looking at something, it depends upon how far out in the future. This group is going to be about 7 or 8 months. So depending on when your building is going to be built, if it's relatively quick, you might join the co-op, talk to the installer, be put at the very end of the site visit phase. And in many cases, installers are willing to look at drawings or can work with a new build. So it is part of it. It's just that the co-op timeline is moving quickly. So depending on your new build, when it's going to be constructed will determine if it's a good fit for the co-op.
So she says she's going to have construction start at the end of summer.
Yeah, it depends. That's right on the that's right on the line. We could talk to you offline and get a little bit more details and help you make that decision.
Okay, and then Catherine, she just wants to clarify, will roof replacement and the electrical panel upgrade be involved or be included in the RFP?
Will roof replacement and electrical panel upgrade be included in the RFP? Typically, the roof replacement is not. So most installers are not roofers, but they will work with a roofer. One advantage of going solar with a roof replacement is that many people are able to lump their the cost of the roof replacement with the federal tax credit, which we're going to talk about. We're not tax accountants, so always ask your tax accountant, but people have done that in the past. So that is typically not involved in the RFP, although we will ask an installer if they work with roofers or if they might even have that service in-house. Electrical panel upgrades are outlined in the RFP, so we'll typically ask the installer what they would charge for a base type of panel upgrade, or any sort of electrical work. Sometimes they'll like a line side tap is a type of job they would do if the panel's not able to accommodate the solar, and they'll give a base range or a fixed price. And installers are also able to work with other electricians. So if you have an electrician that you like or you prefer, they could do the work on your panel, and then the installer will install the system. Questions?
Good. Yeah, it looks like the rest of our questions are regarding the pricing and economics. So.
All right. Okay. So pricing and economics. We'll kind of try to get through these in the next 15 or 20 minutes here. So an overview, a few considerations when you're talking about solar. So solar is priced by the watt. That's really important. So you could have a 1,000 watt or 1 kilowatt system, whether it's 335 watt panels or 4 250 watt panels. It's going to be priced by the watt. It's kind of like buying a engine based on the horsepower. You're going to pay for 250 horsepower, whether it's 4, 6, or 8 cylinders. So always be able to compare that by the watt. It's also a long-term investment. So these are no moving parts, 25-year lifespan. The panels are typically warranted 25 years. The inverters are warranted anywhere between 10 to 25 years. And these are turnkey systems in which the installer designs, procures all the permits, and helps interconnect the system. You're hedging against the average residential utility rate rising. So Dominion rates have risen about 30% in the last 10 years. So you're hedging against those potential increases in rates. Our experience since we've worked in Virginia since 2014 is that you see an average of about a 9 to 13 year return on investment. Now this is going to depend on the site that you get, or the site. If you have a better site, you're going to produce more electricity as opposed to a shaded site. And ultimately the pricing. So if there's a really aggressive price, that can help your return on investment. We like to say expect around 15 to 16,000, kind of somewhere in the middle. But remember, solar systems are highly customizable. So you can get into a system for well under 9,000, especially if you are very efficient with your energy. Conversely, you can get into large systems over 20,000. And it's really just based on what you use and what your goals are for electricity or for solar. So I'm going to walk you through this cash chart, or this chart, and explain a few things and then take some questions. So here we have an example of our average Virginia solar co-op pricing since we began, which is $2.75 a watt. It's not important so much to see the numbers here, but what I think you should get out of it is to show how solar is priced and what your revenue streams are. How does solar pay back? So if you look, we have two different columns. We have a 4 kilowatt system and an 8 kilowatt system. So determining your turnkey price would be a 4,000 watt system multiplied by that average $2.75 a watt would be $11,000. And then the 8 kilowatt system would be 22,000. And your system might be a 5.7 kilowatt system or a 10 kilowatt system, but this is there to give you an illustration of how the prices work. So your first revenue stream, or the first way that your solar pays back, is with incentives. And in Virginia, we don't have any state tax credits, but we still do have a federal tax credit. Our federal tax credit is 26%. It is a tax credit, it's not a deduction. And it applies to people that pay federal taxes. So to get that federal tax credit, you actually have to have a tax liability, or you have to pay into it. So with the $11,000 example for the 4 kilowatt system, 26% of that would be $2,850. And you file that the tax year that your system is installed. So if you know any solar installers, chances are you're not going to see them in the month of December because everybody's trying to get their solar installed before December 31st, especially since these tax credits are stepping down. So last year in 2019, it was 30%. This year in 2020, it's 26%. And next year it drops down to 22%. So that's an incentive to move forward. We're hoping that with some of the stimulus, we can extend that, but that's the way it works right now. So that's your incentive revenue stream. And so after your first year, you're going to see your net cost for the 4 kilowatt system, $8,150, and for the 8 kilowatt system, $16,300. I'm going to skip down from the solar renewable energy credit and review your next revenue stream, and that's your electricity savings. And your electricity savings are simply calculated by calculating your energy production in kilowatt hours over the course of the year, multiplied by the rate that you pay your utility per kilowatt hour. And again, your installer is going to give you a really good idea of what your system's going to produce and then game out what your revenue from your solar savings are. In this case, in the 4 kilowatt example, it's $600. But that's where you're saving money. For example, if the price of electricity rises by 30% in the next 5 years, you're going to be saving that additional 30% with the electricity that you produce from solar. So again, you have your tax credit, your savings from the energy that you produce that you don't have to purchase from the utility. And then the last part is a production-based incentive. We're going to skip back up to the solar renewable energy credit, or some people call it certificate, SREC for short. So your solar renewable energy credit is a production-based incentive. So it is tied to the amount of energy that you produce. And in fact, for every 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, you get 1 SREC. And the way that that works is that in utility territory where there is what's called a mandatory renewable portfolio standard, which essentially dictates that utilities have to produce a certain percentage of their electricity from renewable energy, or they get fined a certain penalty. And it's usually a very modest amount, could be 1 or 2%. But what happens is instead of paying that penalty, they could buy an SREC, or renewable energy credit, from a solar producer like you. And by doing that, it gives a revenue stream, another revenue stream based on the production. So a 4 kilowatt system might produce 5 or 6 SRECs a year. And when we started in Virginia, we had an SREC regime where they were worth about $25. So if you had 5 SRECs a year, that'd be $125. Not much, but it's an additional revenue stream in addition to the energy savings and the federal tax credit. Now, that slowly went away because we used to, in Virginia, had a voluntary renewable portfolio standard, which was kind of, well, it was about as effective as voluntary incarceration, which means it didn't really work. We used to have to sell our SRECs out of state to Pennsylvania. Well, over the years, Pennsylvania closed its market, and the SRECs, which started at $25, are now about $3. So that incentive dried up. However, the good news is that last year with the passage, or this last session with the passage of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, there is now a new renewable portfolio standard and carve-out. Now the challenge is that it's unclear exactly what the value is going to be. But I would suspect that SRECs are going to start to have a little bit more value than what they have. Now, it's really hard to project. So again, you have all of your different revenue streams, your federal tax credit, your savings from energy, and your solar renewable energy credits, or your SRECs. Now, just to give you an example of why we work so hard in policy, is if you were to magically transfer your home across the river to Washington, D.C., where we started out with the $25 SREC, Washington, D.C. actually has $400 SRECs. So if you take that from 5 or 6 that you might produce with a 4 kilowatt system a year, that's a very robust revenue stream. So that's why we fight for really fair policy in Virginia so that solar owners and producers can have access to the same type of incentives that they do in other markets. So I'm sure there's probably some questions on this slide because there always is. I'm going to see if Jessica would like to field any.
So we did have a lot of questions earlier about explaining the SRACs and then how the Clean Economy Act will affect that. So but I feel like you did a really good job of explaining. These are questions from earlier in the presentation.
Okay.
Let me see if we have one more.
Well, I usually don't explain it that well, so I'm sure there's probably some additional questions. And I do have kind of one more fun slide if there aren't any questions on this.
Abby, she does have a question about sort of the economics of solar. She wants to know if it makes sense to go solar if she has gas heat.
Yeah, if you have gas heat, it just depends on what your electric loads are. So, you know, you may have gas heat, but if you run your air conditioning in the summer or have other loads or other things that consume electricity, that you know, that's going to dictate your decision. And that's why the installer, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to look at your utility bill, your electric bill from Dominion or whomever your utility provider is. And they're going to say, this is what you use over the course of the year or average monthly, so we can size the system accordingly. And you know, if you don't have a lot of electricity usage, you can actually get into a relatively small system, you know, get a lot of bang for your buck. So it really depends on what your other electricity usage is. But people that have gas heat will certainly go solar as well because of their other electric devices. So it's a really good question too.
Great, thank you. I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. We have a question about kind of clarifying the co-op process.
Sure.
Somebody asked that they actually are working with an installer right now for solar, and they wanted to know if they could still join the co-op to get the bulk pricing on the equipment.
So they're working with an installer, but they want to join the co-op to get the bulk pricing on the equipment, if I understand that correctly.
Yes.
You know, typically the co-op is a turnkey system. So whomever the installer is going to design, install, and you know, do all of the work for the system. So if you were looking just to get bulk discount on the components, that wouldn't really be part of the co-op. But it might be something, you know, we work outside of the co-op with DIY folks, and our goal is to help you go solar regardless. So if there's a way that we can, you know, facilitate that process, the co-op isn't the only road to Rome. So if there's a way that we can help, we're happy to do that. However, with the components, there really isn't a whole ton of discount in the bulk purchase of them. It's really the efficiency of the process and addressing some of the soft costs, which are non-component. I hope I answered that well for you.
Yeah, I think that was a good clarification.
Again, happy to take questions from any part of the presentation too, if we didn't get to answer them during the session.
Let's see, so Danielle asks, do we own the panels or lease them? What happens if I sell my house in the next 10 years?
Another really excellent question. So these are systems that are owned. And you know, some of the policy, the utilities put a lot of roadblocks to solar, and one of the roadblocks here in Virginia, unlike Maryland or DC, is that residential systems that leasing or PPAs, power purchase agreements, are not allowed on residential. So it makes it easier to answer that question in that no, it would not be leased. And so if you do sell your house, you know, typically you would, you know, solar increases the value of a home. There's some pretty good data that we've seen. In some cases, people have taken their systems, but it's probably best to leave it to the new owner. Let that be an added asset to your home if you decide to sell.
We have another question about SRACs. He wants to know, with the value of SRACs being so low right now, is there any incentive to produce more electricity than you would need for self-consumption?
Yeah, is there any? Typically not. So another another good thing about the law that changed with the Virginia Clean Economy Act and solar freedom, so solar freedom was probably more instrumental in this than clean economy, is that in the past you could only size a system in Dominion territory up to 100% of your past usage. So now the law actually allows you to design a system for 150%, so that you can adopt electric vehicles or any sort of beneficial electrification. So a lot of people that have gas appliances might be switching them out to electricity, especially if you want to power them with solar. Typically, it does not make any sense to overproduce or to be a net energy producer. So say you use 5,000 kilowatt hours of electricity per year, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to produce 6,000 or that $1,000 extra, because it's kind of unclear the way the utility does it. They've done it a couple different ways. Sometimes they will credit your balance to a further year. And then sometimes in the past, they've given like an avoided costs. So a wholesale rate for your excess over what you produce per the year. So if you produce that 1,000 kilowatt hours extra, instead of paying you the 12 cents a kilowatt hour, they might pay you 4.5 cents. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense to oversize unless you're thinking of adopting electric vehicles or anything that's going to increase your energy consumption. But again, another really good question.
Hi, I'm Katie. I was wondering if you could go over financing options.
Yeah, another good question. So one of the things that we've seen change quite a bit since our work started in Virginia in 2014 is now there's a lot more financing options. In the past, people would go with a credit union or a home equity line of credit. Now, installers offer kind of a number of different in-house financing options. They might work, common companies are Dividend or Mosaic, so a lot of them will offer that. It really just depends on the type of product that they're offering. We always say that it's also important to note that these are cash prices. So if you go with a finance system, it always costs money to borrow money. It depends on your credit union or your credit score. So there are a number of financing options. You just talk to your installer and also look at a credit union or a home equity line of credit, which might be a good fit for you.
Somebody else asked a really good question, I thought, about if they need to have electrical upgrades done as part of this process. Would that also potentially be included in their contract? I don't think we answered that. If we did, I'm sorry.
Yes and no. So some installers will offer those electrical upgrades as a service, or if you wanted to do it on your own, or if you had an electrician, say, you had an electrician or somebody that you knew that was licensed that could do the work, you could also have them do the upgrade. So yes, it could be included as part of your contract, but you can also, installers will also work with other electricians that upgrade the panel and make it ready for the installation. Our experience is that it's pretty rare that there'll be any sort of major service upgrades. A lot of times there's just not room in some cases there's just not enough room for the two bars, for the two additional breakers in the panel for solar, but most of the time that's not an issue.
Great. Thanks for pointing that out, Helen. Good question. So yeah, I think that is the last of the questions we have in the chat.
Great. I'll just go to the next slide, and then I'll let you all go, and really appreciate everybody joining. We had quite a few people. This is just an example of if you're looking to size your PV system for an electric vehicle. We actually have a handout that we use and we could make available. But you'll see that there's a pretty handy chart if you're looking to size it based on how many vehicles you drive, and it gives you an example of how much PV or solar capacity you'll need. Because electric vehicles are so efficient at converting electricity into motion, you don't need as much solar as you want, or as you need, or as you think. So this chart can be pretty handy as you look to size your system for electric vehicles. That's really it from our end. Unless there are any additional questions, I'd like to thank you, Jessica, for being a great moderator, and Helen for being a great partner. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We're going to follow up with an email to the RSVPs and attendees of this webinar. And again, really happy to answer any questions or help as needed. So we hope everyone continues to stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to working with you as part of this co-op.